G'day, I'm Max. The wool industry has provided me with a career as a shearer, a living as a wool grower and a hobby as a collector of pastoral memorabilia. My interest probably started from reading about the exploits of the early settlers, the shepherds, the sheep washers, the blade shearers and the changeover to machine shearing. Also, the sheep classes played a major role, such as John Dark and Jonathan and Thomas Shaw. And you can't forget about the contribution of pastoralists such as the Pepin brothers and the Faulkner family in establishing the modern merino as we know it today. The wool industry played a major role in the development of Australia, and it still makes an important contribution today. I'd like to tell you the story of some of these pieces I have on display. In the very early days, when sheep were blade shorn, prior to shearing, they were washed. They were put through a sheep wash. This is a diagram of the sheep wash up here. They were swum along and then rinsed in this final rinse. These drums were used in the final rinse, and because they rotate in any direction, the sheep were put on top of them and turned around with a cascade of water to wash the wool clean. This cylinder here was used along the sheep wash. Men stood in these to keep the sheep moving through the bath. The idea of them was to save them standing in the water all day. They were able to operate from the cylinder. I'd like to tell you the story of some of these pieces I have on display. This plant here was made in Geelong in 1908 by J.C. Brown. This apparatus is a kerosene torch heating searing irons in the back. The lamb's tails are put under here and the tail cut off with the hot searing iron. This has got a rather marvellous story. This was originally owned by Samuel McCackey of Dunlop Station fame on the Darling River in New South Wales. This piece here is a 1906 hand-operated comb and cutter grinder for shearers. It works by rotating the top plate and the comb and cutters oscillate back and forward over the top plate. Over here we have one of the very early shaft-driven shearing plants. The original one from 1888 was a rope drive which gave no end of problems. This one was operated on a shaft with a friction wheel, and this proves to be a successful model. This handpiece collection is a pretty important part of this display. These handpieces were put together by a company called Angar Getty Malik in the 1920s. They had the wisdom and the foresight to realise that with all the rapid changes that were coming with the development of the shearing handpiece, that a lot of these older models were being discarded. This collection has models from different countries, different experiments from models made in Australia, and it covers the development from early prototypes right up until the 1930s, when the present day design of a handpiece was perfected. Up until today it hasn't altered. Some of the feature handpieces in this collection are like this particular one here. That's a 1888 model, the first successful handpiece that Wolseley designed. It's called the Riley model, and that was used at the first mechanical shearing on Dunlop Station in 1888. Other handpieces, this Smoko, which is a wax casting, was made by Newell Brothers in England in the 1890s. It's a beautifully constructed one. Bergen and Ball made this particular model here with a wooden hand grip. They played a big role in the development of shearing handpieces, and the company is still operating today. This one here was designed and manufactured by John Howard. He was the head engineer in the Wolseley Sheep Shearing Machine Company. This one here is the first production model of Moffat Virtue, which is Australian. This one over here is a silver from Tamworth in New South Wales. This one here is a Grace, once again an Australian model. Over the time that we've had this collection, we've added significant handpieces to it, and we intend to keep this collection together because we feel that we are only the custodians of it while we have it. This is a shearer's bike, pre-1900 frame with the long gooseneck. This bike could no doubt tell a lot of stories. Travelling by push bike was the main form of transport for shearers in the early days, and they had to travel on unmade roads. That's why the seat is a sprung seat. The toolkit fits neatly in the frame of the bike, and the other feature is the carbide light. These bikes were fitted with thorn-proof tyres because of the bindi eyes that were all over the roads. They're very thick rubber. In this small display of husbandry tools for sheep, perhaps the feature item are these small sheep bells. Everyone knows about horse bells and camel bells and cow bells, but the sheep bells have a different story. These bells were used by the shepherds in the very early days prior to fencing. The shepherds looked after the flocks of sheep, and every sheep in the mob didn't have a bell, but in a mob of say 200 there'd be 12 to 14 bells. The shepherds became very familiar with the ring of each bell, and by hearing the bells they could work out roughly the location of the sheep so that when they brought them back in at night they knew where the whole flock was. Over here we have early catalogues from sheep sales and shows, and some of these are very old. They go back to 1880, and these have a comprehensive cover of all the animals that were in clearing sales in the early days. They covered the sheep, horses, the breeding of even dogs, the carts and everything were all catalogued in these little pamphlets. Coopers played a major role in Australia. They supplied the Coopers' diaries and the Coopers' sheepmen's notebooks. They also made a Coopers' notebook for shearers as well. The Cooper Company were primarily involved in sheep dip and animal health products, and that company is also still going today. In the 40 years of my involvement in the wool industry, there's been a lot of changes. When I first started shearing, the predominant sheep in this area were the fine wool merino. They were small framed and they only cut about 6 pounds of wool, which is barely 3 kilos. With the introduction of fibre measurement in the late 60s, there was a rapid change because growers all of a sudden realised that the visual look didn't represent the true fibre measurement of the fleece. This brought about a change to the more modern merino we have today. The sheep today cut a big, bold, soft-cutting white fleece with a long staple. Other changes have been the demise of the Corriedales and Polworths. Today, they're replaced by first cross ewes producing fat lambs. In the wool shed, perhaps the biggest change I've seen has been the hydraulic wool press. This was a huge step forward as it eliminated so much manual labour. No doubts in the future other changes will occur. But one thing that hasn't changed at all, the shearer is still required and doing the same job that he's done for the past 120 odd years.